Here's your host for this morning's edition of America's Fabric.
Good morning. I am Dr. Elizabeth Lee Valite. I'm an independent physician in private practice in Tucson and Dallas, and the author of several health books for consumers. My medical website is www.herplace.com. In recent shows, I have talked about several critical issues that affect your liberty as guaranteed under our Constitution and Declaration of Independence. First, the health insurance exchanges mandated under the 2010 healthcare law that will require you to exchange your liberty for more government control of your medical care options. Second, the hidden clauses in health insurance contracts that could prevent you from paying cash for medical care you might need to save your life. Third, the Fifth Amendment violation by the federal government taking your medical records without your consent and without compensation to you for using your medical information to serve the public good and possibly deprive you of treatment you need to save your life by denying medical care based on your medical records and your medical history. Today, we will be discussing another one of these critical issues that's going on under your nose, but behind the scenes and invisible to you, the patient. This is the abuse of power by hospitals and medical boards across the country. This is happening in ways that drastically interfere with your ability to find a physician who can serve your best interest and medical needs, one who answers only to you, the patient. The abuses of power by hospital boards and medical boards are driving independent physicians out of medicine, and they are designed to do that. That is dangerous to patients' very lives. It is the opposite of our tradition of freedom to choose when, where, and with whom we seek medical treatment. And it is the opposite of our Declaration of Independence that says we are given the right to life and liberty by our Creator. If you are denied approval for medical care you need, your life is at stake. I have a guest with me this morning who will help explain this complex subject and exactly what is going on behind the scenes. Andrew Schlafly is the attorney who has filed suit on behalf of AAPS to overturn the President's 2012 healthcare law and has sued the Texas Medical Board on behalf of independent physicians whose rights of due process were being violated by anonymous complaints. In some cases, complaints initiated by insurance companies who simply didn't like the way the physicians were billing for services or thought the physicians may have been giving patients more services than what the insurance company thought was necessary, overriding physician decisions. Mr. Schlafly is the legal counsel for the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons that has been a voice for private, independent physicians and patients' medical freedom since 1943. And now I'd like to ask Mr. Schlafly to explain the alarming trends he has seen happening across the country, illustrating massive abuses of power by hospitals and medical boards attacking independent physicians who are trying to stand up for their patients, and how these abusive practices affect your medical freedom and possibly your life. Welcome to America's Fabric, Mr. Schlafly.
Thank you, Dr. Fleet. It's an honor to be on your wonderful show.
Well, thank you for being here. I have been absolutely shocked at the information that you have presented at the AAPS annual meeting. Talk to our audience about just exactly what hospitals are doing to abuse their power and how that affects patients.
Hospitals are eliminating independent private physicians from their staff because hospital executives have learned that they can maximize their own compensation by controlling the medical decisions that happen on their staff with respect to patients. And the way that they gain greater control over those medical decisions is by eliminating the independent physicians from the medical staff. If you go back 20, 30 years, most doctors on a medical staff at a hospital were independent. They had their own private practices. They could make decisions based on what was best for the patient. That is changing now rapidly, where now most doctors on a medical staff of a hospital are controlled by the hospital. They may be employees of the hospital, or they may be part of a group that has an exclusive contract with the hospital. Either way, they're under the thumb of the hospital, and the decisions by those physicians will be in the hospital's best interest rather than in the patient's best interest. And in some areas of the country, this problem has gotten so severe that there are hospitals that have virtually no independent physicians on their staff.
That is really alarming for patients, and they don't realize that because they don't know. It's not disclosed to the patients that their physician may be an employee of the hospital or may have that exclusive contract that restricts some of their decision-making.
That's exactly right. And the audience should realize that any of us at any time can be taken by an ambulance to a hospital now where the hospital does not permit a second opinion by an independent physician. If any of us were in a car accident, we'd be taken to the nearest hospital. That hospital may be one of these bad hospitals that has driven all of its independent physicians off the staff. So even if we were to ask for a second opinion at that hospital, all they would do is give us another doctor who works for the hospital or is under control of the hospital, and those decisions made by those doctors are going to be in the hospital's best interest rather than in our best interest.
Well, you know, I've had patients tell me stories that suggested this sort of thing was going on, and in the sense that they felt that a family member went in for an emergency, let's say a heart attack, and they didn't feel that the care was very aggressive to save their family member's life.
That's right. And often the care that's provided can be correlated to the reimbursement that the hospital is receiving. So we've heard reports from independent physicians where they've had a patient in a particular hospital, and the care would be okay for a while. But then when the government reimbursement for that care ran out, then the patient, shockingly, would start to put on a track towards an end-of-life type of situation. And the hospital would start to do things like a morphine drip in order to hasten the expiration of that patient. And we've heard from physicians who are shocked by the sudden drop-off in quality of care by hospitals once the reimbursement for the hospital runs out.
Well, you know, the British hospitals are using the Liverpool pathway, which is a calculated method of using morphine drips and withholding IV fluid and withholding nutrition, and they have calculated that they can end someone's life in 33 hours, which limits the cost to the state.
I'm sure there are members of this audience who have had relatives go to a hospital with a minor medical condition that should have been treated and the patient should have been discharged from the hospital. But instead, a situation that should have been addressed properly went from bad to worse, and the relative tragically died in the hospital. And listeners to this show were wondering at the time, how did this happen? And it's particularly an elderly patient. Hospital will look at an age of a patient, and they'll make a determination as to whether that patient should be saved or not. And that's terrible, because there are many people out there who are in their late 70s, late 80s, or even 90s who were healthy individuals who should continue to live a number of additional years, but hospitals will look at their age and look at their situation, look at way to maximize their revenue for those patients, and that patient will die in that hospital.
And this is just tragic. This is what was done in Hitler's Germany and under Lenin and Stalin in the Soviet Union. It's done today in Cuba and Venezuela and any totalitarian government. It is the antithesis of our founders' vision for freedom. It is God's gift of life that is being abused when hospital-based physicians, hospital-employed physicians, or hospital executives and ethics committees who are not physicians make these kinds of decisions. How exactly are the hospitals driving out the independent physicians? I understand they have some procedures they use.
They have a variety of tricks, and they go to training seminars to learn how to do this. And one trick they use is called peer review. And what they'll do is they'll look at an independent physician who's on their staff who maybe bucks some of the hospital's decisions with respect to a particular patient. In other words, the individual physician will stand up for a patient. Then the hospital will initiate peer review, which means the hospital will pull the doctor's medical records, review those records, which could be thousands of cases, and look for any type of irregularity or any type of issue that could be raised about the medical records. In one case I'm handling, the physician was transferring some patients out of the poor hospital to a better hospital. So he was making decisions to help patient care by transferring some of his patients to a better hospital. Well, the hospital initiated a peer review on him and asserted that the doctor was improperly transferring patients, but he was transferring those patients to a better hospital.
To save their life.
To save their life, and yet the hospital used it as a basis to summarily suspend that physician from the staff.
And what happens when a doctor is suspended? A lot of patients don't realize what might happen to their doctor under something like this.
When a doctor is suspended, then that goes within 30 days to a database called the National Practitioner Database. And that is like a blacklist that ruins the reputation of doctors, so he can never get a job at any other hospital again. Now, in the case I just described, I took emergency legal action and got a federal court to enjoin and block the hospital from filing a report to the National Practitioner Data Bank about this incident. But that was highly unusual.
Yes, because
9 times
out of 10, I think you were going to say it's too late.
Exactly.
The other aspect that listeners may not realize is that if a doctor is reported to that National Practitioner Data Bank, that affects the doctor's ability to get a license in the state that he's licensed in, where you might be seeing the doctor, but then that, in turn, affects his ability to get a license in any other state. So basically, it's a domino effect, and that doctor may never be able to practice again.
Right, and then the message that is sent to every other doctor who hears about it is that you better not stand up for patient care or it's going to happen to you. So the doctor is put into a position where he has to choose between standing up for patient care or saving his own career, and that's an unfair choice that hospitals are imposing on doctors.
Well, you're right, and it shows how physicians cannot serve two masters. The patient must come first, and yet the forces behind the scenes are pushing us away from that. Tell us a little bit about the suit against the Texas Medical Board. How was that board abusing its power to constrain or restrict or drive out independent physicians?
The Texas Medical Board, which supervises about 10% of the nation's physicians, was doing three things to interfere with quality medical care. And one thing it was doing is it was processing confidential complaints against doctors, often filed in bad faith, and manipulating those complaints to interfere with the practices of good doctors. So, for example, it might be a member of the board, the Texas Medical Board, who would confidentially file a complaint against one of her competitors as a way to drive her competitor out of business. And then that deprives the patients of Texas from the medical services of that good physician. So that was the first thing that was going on. Second thing that was going on is conflicts of interest, where you could have members of the Texas Medical Board who were receiving compensation from insurance companies while they passed judgment on doctors who had conflicts with insurance companies. And you have to realize that insurance companies don't want innovative care. They don't want a doctor to provide necessary care to a patient that's expensive to the insurance company. So there's a constant tension between the doctor trying to help the patient and the insurance company trying to reduce its expenses and paying for that care. So we've had at least one doctor on the Texas Medical Board who was receiving compensation as a consultant or an advisor to the insurance industry while he was passing judgment on doctors who had conflicts with insurance companies. And then the third thing the Texas Medical Board has been doing is retaliating against doctors. Doctors who criticize the medical board, doctors who sue to stop the filing of bad faith complaints against him. Well, the Texas Medical Board then retaliates against those doctors and disciplines them and threatens to take away their license. And that's, of course, a very scary thing for a doctor who's invested his whole life and hundreds of thousands of dollars into obtaining his medical license to have the Texas Medical Board threaten to take that license away, and sometimes they do revoke it unfairly.
And that, in turn, deprives patients of doctors who are advocating for the patient. I think our listeners really do not understand how much this is going on nationally behind the scenes. It's a coordinated effort by the medical boards and by hospital groups, as you said, and I want to emphasize something you said earlier about the training seminars to teach hospital administrators how to use these techniques. I find that chilling.
Yes, and there's a lot of money in this. All the patients out there, all of us should realize that these hospital executives are making millions of dollars individually out of interfering with patient care. And there's a lot of money in these medical boards, too. There's a lot of power as they interfere with medical care. So the money is on the other side. We've got hospital executives who are making many millions of dollars a year now. And the more they can interfere with care, the more money they make.
Well, there's that. And then there's the fact that we learned this weekend that many of the executive directors of medical boards are lawyers, not doctors.
That's right. That's right. These decisions are made at medical boards by people who are attorneys. And attorneys have kind of an inbred hostility to innovative medical care. Another thing I want to add, Dr. Vliet, is that there's a shortage of doctors in this country. 49% of the counties in the United States do not have a single OBGYN physician.
That is staggering.
And the shortage is getting worse. The New York Times reported that because of the new health care law, this shortage of physicians in the United States is going to get even worse. And within about 10 years, there's going to be a shortage of 100,000 doctors.
You know,
all of us.
It's just staggering, and this is, people have got to realize that all the political language on the air, fundamentally, if you don't have a doctor, it doesn't matter whether you have insurance coverage or not. If there's no one to deliver the care, you're going to die. And that's what's happened. I've seen it in the Soviet Union in the 70s. I've seen it in London hospitals. I know that this is a serious problem. I want to thank you so much for taking your time to be here today. I know you have had a horrendous week with the Texas Medical Board trial and our annual meeting and all of the activities that you're involved in to preserve patient freedom. And I consider you a hero on the medical freedom fighting front. So I just want to thank you, Andy, for being here today and sharing this with our audience. I may want to have you back to talk about some of the issues in the lawsuit to overturn the 2010 healthcare law, because I think our listeners need to better understand further what some of the issues are with that. Is there anything you'd like to quickly say in closing before I wrap up?
We count on patients waking up to what is going on and standing up against the interference with medical care in this country. The United States has had the finest system for delivering medical care in the world, and it's up to us as patients, Dr. Vliet, to stand up against the government and insurance attempts to interfere with them.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your being here. To all of our listeners, in recent shows, I have talked about these critical issues that affect your liberty that are guaranteed under our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our Declaration of Independence, such as health insurance exchanges, exchanging your liberty for government control, clauses in health insurance contracts that will prevent you from paying cash for your own medical care. That's in violation of Prop 106 in Arizona that guarantees in our Constitution the Healthcare Freedom Act to spend your money as you wish for your medical services. And the violation of the Fifth Amendment by taking your medical records and using them without your consent for the collective good and using them to deny you treatment based upon your age and your medical condition. And then today, you heard staggering discussion of behind-the-scenes hospital, medical boards, and insurance company strategies and techniques that are abusing their power to absolutely drive independent physicians out of medicine. The very doctors that take care of you, that answer to you, and with whom your life may be controlled. So you want more independent physicians, not less. We must return to our core fabric of America and our founders' belief that life and liberty are God-given. They are bestowed upon us by our Creator, not by government. This focus on the collective or community good and the focus on all of us belonging to the government is the complete opposite of our founders' vision and what our Constitution was set up to protect. They were escaping tyranny when they founded America. We do not want to put back tyranny now. The kinds of abuse of power that you heard from Mr. Schlafly today are more egregious examples of out-of-control government intrusion and control of our lives. We are moving towards a totalitarian state. We must look at the point we have reached. 2012 marks a major fork in the road for our future direction. You cannot have both. Will we choose to preserve our founders' vision, or will we choose the road leading to the government dictating every aspect of our lives and how we spend the money we earn, how we can work, whether there'll be jobs available, plus how and when we die, and what happens on the way to death. Time is running out. We must all fight to preserve our economic freedom, our medical freedom, our religious freedom, and the ability to choose our destiny. The time is now. We won't get a second chance to preserve liberty for us, our children, our grandchildren, and future generations. Once it is lost, liberty is rarely regained. As citizens and patients, you must become involved and fight to protect your liberty and your medical freedom and your life. This is Dr. Valit signing off for today. Go to www.patientpoweramerica.com or www.herplace.com or aapsonline.org for more on these ideas.
You've been listening to America's Fabric, a radio series on American history and culture, broadcast every Sunday over KVOI Tucson and its affiliates. Be sure to tune in again next Sunday morning at 8. Until then, never forget, it's the courage, knowledge, hard work, and respect for truth of Americans that keeps America free and prosperous. America's Fabric is listener-supported. To make a contribution, send a check to America's Fabric, Post Office Box 17356, Tucson, Arizona, 85731. That's P.O. Box 17356, Tucson, 85731. All contributions are tax exempt, and every contributor will be mailed a Grateful to be an American bumper sticker. To get more information on America's Fabric or to listen to previous broadcasts, go to americasfabric.com. That's americasfabric.com.